I'm going to start off with a few words to describe what we're going to do today. Your risk choices identify you to the world and define you as distinctively as a fingerprint. And in this fireside chat, we'll learn about the often surprising origins of your risk fingerprint and those of the people around you, and how to turn this knowledge into a powerful business tool. I'm particularly delighted to introduce our speaker for this session, who I'm going to have that fireside chat with, who is Michelle Walker. Michelle, I think it's fair that I may call you a friend and colleague. We've met a number of times, and you know I'm an avid reader of your work, both published and on your podcast, for example. Michelle is a strategist and author, and she's the author who coined the term that many of us have used in our jobs, and that is grey rhino. For obvious reasons, probable impactful risks, which are surprisingly likely, but not condemned to neglect. A former media and think tank executive, Michelle is founder of the Chicago-based advisory firm, Grey Rhino and Company. She's the author of 4 books, including the influential global bestseller, The Grey Rhino, How to Recognize and Act on the Obvious Dangers We Ignore, and the newly released sequel, You Are What You Risk, The New Art and Science of Navigating an Uncertain World. And I've had the great privilege to read Michelle's latest book, and I commend it to you all. So, Michelle, welcome to us today.
Thank you so much. Delighted to see you.
So this is going to be a fireside chat, but we've got a couple of hundred people just casually listening in as well. I'm very pleased that you can join us from Chicago, and we, as I've said, may have a few folk listening in, but we're going to take this informally, because what people want to do is not listen to me, they want to listen to you. So I'm going to sort of pose a few questions, and we will let the conversation flow. We've only got one slide today, and we'll know when to put that up, because I think it's around about the 3rd question that I'm going to ask you about a certain lady who got up to some very interesting exploits, which is described in the early part of your book. So, but before we get to that stage, Michelle, your book, The Grey Rhino, focused on dealing promptly with sometimes seemingly obvious and impactful and probable risk. But despite these coming straight at you like a charging rhino, these seem to be able to remain ignored and unaddressed. How did this inspire your latest book?
Well, thanks for that great question, Julia. As I went around the world talking about the grey rhino, I was amazed at how many people asked me how to apply this to their personal lives. And of course, you know, each person has very, very different issues. And so that got me thinking about what the influences were on each one of us. The grey rhino was really about the stages of a risk themselves, and sort of policy and finance and sort of the structural issues that are the bread and butter of my career. And then a couple of other things happened. A lot of risk professionals told me how they struggled with trying to get people to think and care as much about some of these issues as they did, you know, the things that kept them up at night, and they really needed a better way to talk with people. And then the final thing was to see how different people's relationships with risk were in different parts of the world, particularly in China, where the book was an immediate bestseller and people just really got it. And then I'd come back to the States and people say, oh, well, you know, if it was obvious, then we did something, and if we didn't do something, it means it must have been a black swan that nobody could see and do anything about, which was crazy. And so I really wanted to understand how those different cultural and social environments affected each one of our individual relationships with risk. So the book was really an effort to answer some of those questions, and it brought it back full circle to the beginning of my career, where I did a lot more cultural criticism, and my very first ambition was to be a psychologist. So I was really happy to be able to incorporate some of those lines of investigation.
Thanks, Michelle. So just sort of moving on to sort of common perceptions and misconceptions, what do you think some of these are about taking risks? Do you have a view on that?
Well, I think a lot of risk management focuses so much on the risks themselves that they forget about this feedback loop between how you perceive something and how you respond to it. And it's something I described as like being in a room full of funhouse mirrors. That risk is actually something very slippery. A lot of the risk management and insurance is built around actuarial tables and calculating things so you can put a price on it, and the entire economy functions on that. But there's a disconnect between these sort of quantitative approaches to risk and the way it happens in the real world, and that a lot of the vocabulary that particularly quantitative risk professionals deal with is not at all the same as what people use in real life. And I felt like we really needed to create a bridge between those two conversations.
So I think we've got coming up, Michelle, if we can put up just the one slide that we've got for this session. And before anybody smartly says this, no, this is not a picture of me. But I want to take a small diversion. Michelle, you're going to have to explain to me, because this is covered in your book. So just for the benefit of the two of us, what makes a 63-year-old woman in 1901 decide to try and be the first person to ride over Niagara Falls in a souped-up pickle barrel as part of a get-rich-quick scheme?
Well, so the woman is the woman in the picture with her pickle barrel, Annie Edson Taylor. And she, to me, seemed to embody really all of the different things that go into the risk fingerprint, the influences on us, how we were raised, the people around us. She had lost both her father and then later her husband suddenly they died. And so she'd had these shocks. She'd spent a lot of her life traveling. She'd lived, all across the states and in Mexico. She'd been a teacher, so she had sort of an adventurous spirit. She was well enough off financially that she didn't have to worry for most of her life until shortly before the pickle barrel incident. And it also was a time of a lot of turbulence, the turn of the century. You'd seen, financial shocks, you'd seen a presidential assassination. There was this sense of everything being uncertain and changing, which, has certain parallels to where we are today. And the other part about her risk taking is she didn't just fling herself over the falls. The pickle barrel had sort of, leather straps to hold on and padding, and she'd sent it over with her cat. And by some accounts, the cat survived, and other ones it didn't. But I've seen pictures, which I hope were after that incident or not. So she did a lot of things to reduce the risk. And then, of course, the financial element of it was, she was trying to figure out what she could do that was reasonably honest, but also would make a lot of money. And that actually turned out to be the worst of the risks, worst risk calculation that she took, because she hadn't thought through that she wasn't the most dynamic speaker ever. And the other risk that she miscalculated was she'd hired this carnival manager promoter guy, and they had decided she was going to lie about her age, that she was only 40 something instead of 60 something. And she actually went over on her 64th birthday. And he, at the end of this, stole the pickle barrel, and he got some other woman who was the age that she said she was, and they went around promoting it, claiming that the other woman was her. And so it ended up not making her a lot of money, but that this decision to go over the falls, which succeeded, and she got a little bump on the head, but she did it safely, was not just a single decision, but it was a whole set of things. It was a social and financial environment. It was her history. It was the shocks that had happened to her. It was the methodical approach that she took to the pickle barrel. And, it was a thing she hadn't completely thought through. So it really wasn't just the risk of going over the falls. It was the whole environment that led to that act.
Mm. So, and I think this style that you take of sort of storytelling and then expanding the story into some of the more academic points and business points that you want to make is a really great way of telling the tales. But Annie particularly caught my attention because I thought, gosh, 120 years ago, that was quite something to do. It'd be quite something to do today, actually, but all those years ago. So, Michelle, one of the concepts in the book that you talk about a lot is risk fingerprints. So I'm going to ask you a two-part question and just let you flow with what you'd like to say. So the first one is, could you explain what the concept of the risk fingerprint is? And then as a second part, and I'll come back and just sort of remind that if you want me to, is I'd like that to lead into some of what we're seeing today as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully, and that is the subject of vaccine hesitancy. And I'd like you to just share with us your thoughts on any particular resonance of the risk fingerprint and that hesitancy that we ought to take away for decision makers, managers, policy makers, and risk professionals in dealing with, in some cases, a sceptical public, and for some, a sceptical workforce. So, but would you like to start with the risk fingerprint, and then we'll sort of go into the vaccine as a practical example?
Sure. Well, hopefully you got a little bit of a flavor of it from Annie Taylor's story. But the risk fingerprint is really the set of reasons behind why you make the risk choices that you do. If you imagine a fingerprint on a wine glass at a crime scene that the detectives put all their fingerprint powder on to identify the culprit, the risk choices that you make and their consequences tell the world who you are, just like that fingerprint on the wine glass. Although hopefully some of the risks you're taking are good risks, not just dangerous criminal risks like that the murder, the crime scene. But what makes that imprint is a set of influences, some genetic, some experiential, some your broader environment, the habits that you take, and some of them even neurobiological, responding to how hot or cold it is in the room, or what you had for lunch. And these are a combination of genetic, like the actual shape of the whorls and arcs on your fingerprint. That's like your innate personality. The experiences I liken to a scar across that finger. The environment, your fingerprint actually sweats or it shrivels up if you stay in the bathtub too long. So, your environment changes that. But the social context is hugely important. As I mentioned before, different countries have completely different conversations about risk. And then your habits, which, again, relying on the real life metaphor, it's the difference between, say, manual labor, calloused hands, and someone who puts nice shea butter lotion on their fingers and keeps it nice and smooth. So there's some things you can't change. There are some things that are out of your control. And there are other things that you can change, like habits and processes and changing your environment. And those are the kind of things that I really want people to focus on. And this whole question of vaccine hesitancy and masks is a really great example, in particular, of how some of these outside influences affect our risk fingerprint. The innate personality part of it has to do with how anxious or calm you are, like how much attention you tend to pay to risks or not, and how impulsive or methodical you are. These 4 variables are something that actually Jeff Trickey at Psychological Consultancy in the UK works with a lot, and something he called the risk type compass, which is a tool that I'm obsessed with and talk about in the book. It's for helping to understand your risk type, what your personality is, and that doesn't change. But I think there are some people who are just never going to get a vaccine. They're never going to wear a mask because they're hardwired that way. But there are other ways in which your personality reacts to your environment. We've seen in the US in particular that whether you get a vaccine or not, or wear a mask or not, is often a political statement. And we're in this sort of tribal environment right now that's so polarized that some people tie their identity so closely to political groups. And you see people very strongly influenced by that. And it also involves how much you know about the risk. What are the odds, that the vaccine is going to protect you? You hear this whole debate about which vaccine has which better protection rates or not. Now you hear about the Delta, the Lambda variant, and so it's really a combination of where you're coming from personally, the people you hang out with who help to form your identity, the knowledge you have, knowledge being hugely important in risk perception and management, and a sense of control that you have over a situation. There's some people who control what they can. I mean, it's like the story about the policeman who finds the drunk guy looking under a lamppost for his keys, and the guy dropped them down the street, but he's looking under the light because that's what that's where he can see. And people who refuse to wear masks or refuse to get vaccines are doing something very similar in a lot of cases. They're controlling what they can in an environment that feels very, very uncertain, where they feel like they have little control. So that's another element of it. So understanding why people don't get their vaccines is really an important part of how you apply the fingerprint concept. And once you understand that, you can understand how to provide incentives or perhaps get them to change their behavior.
And Michelle, you have another concept which seems to be very closely related to this, and that is the risk temperature of people in your team, and perhaps in relating to your organisation's culture. And culture is quite a big topic for us at the moment in EMIC, because we're supporting one of our regulators here in updating guidance on culture. So this is a bit of a hot topic, but although we'll avoid the pandemic analogy of testing people's temperature as they come through the airport, or into the store, but is the concept of risk temperature of the people in your team and your organisation, what does that mean? And again, how can we use that in practice?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that cultures and organizations and societies have their own sort of version of a risk fingerprint, and the temperature is really at a particular point in time. But you might have a big legacy organization where the thing that people fear most is doing something that's not the way we've always done it, and that's a huge social risk for them and a career risk. Or you have, say, like a startup where the ethos is move fast and break things, and that's a completely different set of attitudes towards risk, where people are gonna run hot. And that culture in the organization, it might be consistent across the organization. You might have a variety of risk attitudes, which is actually the direction which I think organizations should go, so that you can realize that different views about risk and different abilities to respond to them actually help to strengthen, just like diversity of thought in all sorts of other fields. Those are very good things. But there's a feedback loop between this organization, the culture and the temperature there, and individuals. And you want to know if your particular relationship with risk is consistent with the organization. A lot of people will end up, a lot of people with similar careers will have very similar risk fingerprints, and that contributes to the culture of the organization. And it goes down to, do you want to be an innovative organization? Do you have a steady stream of revenue? Are you more worried about losing that product that's always sold for you, or are you more worried about missing the next big thing? And those questions about risk, the good risk that you're willing to take, the bad risk that you're willing to avoid, that really tells you where your organization is going, and whether it's even the right organization for you. You can make tweaks to change some of those things, but that's a huge change management exercise.
Mm. So, Michelle, would you go as far as to say, this is a slightly provocative question, so forgive me for this, but would you go so far as to say that there are different types of risk personality? And if there are, and this is really pushing my luck, are there ideal types of personality for people in managing risk?
Absolutely. And this is, the sort of the innate part of your risk fingerprint, that it's much harder to change, although you can come up with some habits that help sort of moderate the connection between who you are and whether you succeed or not in a particular environment. I get asked this a lot, is there an ideal type? And I always answer no, but the important thing is that you understand the type and how it fits with the environment around you. Like, you know, if you're this super adventurous type and you don't really pay attention to things, maybe being an air traffic controller is not the best career choice for you. And some of these types are things we wouldn't necessarily expect. Like, you know, daredevils, adventure runners, actually a couple of you know, extreme athletes and an adventure runner who I interviewed for the book. And our stereotype of them is that they're these, you know, daredevil adventure types. But the truth is they're actually very methodical about preparing for things. You know, racing across the poles in an adventure race, or you know, extreme skiing, things like that. You know, they really investigate the environment. They practice. They test things. You know, they talk to other experts. They train. They do all these things that really reduce the risk. And so the amount of risk is actually very different from, you know, some weekend warrior who decides to go out and do something, you know, do some big jump on the ski slope and breaks their leg. Well, it's, you know, the experienced person doing that jump, for them, it's something they could almost do in their sleep. And it's not a huge risk, but for the, you know, for the weekend warrior, it is. So it's really a matter of matching your personality with what you decide to do in your career. You know, some people really want to work for the man and have their pension and everything set up. And other people are just terrified of the risk of having a control freak boss who doesn't know what they want. So it's a matter of being aware and matching it. So any type of personality that involves the awareness and the knowledge and the preparation, you know, that part of it is something that you really want to strive for. That part of it is ideal. But the rest of it is really, you know, making sure that who you are matches your circumstances, and that you have the tools that you need to make good risk decisions.
Mm. Well, you're making me think actually of an anecdote that I'll comment on and then move on. That certainly in parts of my career, I've worked with people with other responsibilities who I would regard as risk daredevils. I can certainly remember a very active, shall we say, discussion that I've had with people in information security, who I often thought of as risk daredevils. And I think they thought of me as boring and stopping them doing what they wanted to do. But what I learned in life was a little bit much less elegantly put than you've put. But what I learned was that I needed to understand their risk personality, that they liked taking risk and that they liked new things. And we were naturally more risk averse and wanted to keep the business safe, but we didn't want to deny opportunity. They just wanted more opportunity than perhaps was good for the business. So learning that personality of the people who are around you can actually we ended up as great friends and great allies, rather than competitors in trying to do different things. So we joined forces and we looked at things in a connected way, and life was instantly much preferable to the way it had been. But do you think we're prone to cluster in certain types of careers like that? And do you have any observations to make as we're talking about risk management here today, in the sense of risk management?
Absolutely, people do tend to cluster. And in fact, Jeff Trickey talks about how he's looked over it's probably close to 20,000 tests that they've done at this point with the risk type compass. When they do it in a boardroom, for example, people with very similar types happen to usually sit next to each other in the room just by chance. It just so happens that way. But that there are also certain careers where you see big clusters, you know, air traffic controllers, for example, or, you know, lawyers tend to have a lot of similarities. And what's interesting about it is I actually talked with a lawyer as I was doing the research. He had been, he had two hats he wore. One was as chief counsel, and the other one was as head of like marketing and distribution. Completely different risk mindset. And, you know, I think he felt a little schizophrenic about it, but he said it was a really good exercise for him to kind of switch his risk brain in the different tasks. And I've talked to a lot of other lawyers about how they focus on minimizing certain kinds of risks, but they forget that creates knock-on risks that they might not have thought about. And that goes also to the to the idea of the friend you talk about who was more about opportunity. A question I often ask people, and would be great if if people here might ask themselves this today, is how do you define risk? And it's great seeing pop up in the chat room that some people, and it's completely different depending on the audience too, which is really cool. But some people have a very negative, possibility of loss, threat, danger, peril, all these scary kinds of words. And then other people talk about it as an opportunity, a gain. They talk about risk assets in the market, or like the Robin Hood traders who only see the upside. And there's some people who say the answer, which is what I like, which is that, well, it depends. And that risk is value neutral. It involves the balancing out of the opportunity and the danger, and that each one of us brings a prejudice to how we're thinking about risk. And so it's, the relationship with your colleague is fascinating, because those balance each other out. And that brings us to this other concept of risk empathy, which I found really resonates. And I thank my editor for this, because I'd had a couple lines about it, and she says, please do more with that. So I interviewed my friend Maria Ross, who wrote this great book, The Empathy Edge, but it's really about how, once you understand your own risk fingerprint, what goes into it and what shapes your risk decisions, you can then better understand someone else. And that gives you a path forward. The easiest application is when you're travel buddies and you're fighting over how much time to leave to go to the airport. When you understand where someone else is coming from, it's much easier to find a way to meet in the middle and to find a path forward. And this becomes hugely important in teamwork, in relationships, in client relationships, in marketing. Even some of my research showed that people have very different risk perceptions depending on what country something came from, and some of that has a basis in fact that countries have different standards. So really understanding that, applying this risk empathy is such a powerful interpersonal tool, and particularly for risk professionals who are used to talking to people who might not worry as much about risks as they do. It just opens this huge pathway forward, through a door that a lot of people probably didn't even realize was closed in the first place.
Well, look, I can't believe that half an hour is almost gone in this private conversation that we're having between the two of us. But I'm going to close with a question that I think is uppermost and relevant to many of us at the moment. In the book, you talk of the malaise that many people around the world are feeling right now. And I think we here in the UK, many of us feel that malaise. But we're standing on the precipice of some very major changes, and we're still very unaware that this malaise, and we're aware that it will persist for some time to come. Whatever our Prime Minister does about removing controls, much of that malaise is going to be there. So as a final word, what, if anything, do you think, Michelle, that we can do about this? Is it our perception that needs to change? Or are there more concrete things or actions that we can take?
I think this idea of the actions that we can take is so powerful. And, it's part of this gray rhino versus black swan thinking that, if you focus on the things that you can do something about, that protects you against the things that you can't do anything about. Because, if you get into a situation like what we've lived through over the last year, and there are certain avoidable surprises and preventable problems that you've just let pile up by the wayside. When you add those to the pile of things that you couldn't control, it becomes unmanageable. And one of the reasons that we don't act on things is that we don't feel we have a sense of control. We don't have a sense of human agency. And focusing on what really what you can do, and understanding why you feel you can do something or not, surrounding yourself with people who can help you, of finding the knowledge that you need, tracking that down. Those are the kind of tools that can help you to navigate it. And the very first tool is self-awareness. And in a lot of cases, you don't need to go to the library for that. You've got all the material that you need right there. You just need maybe some guides as to what to start thinking about.
Michelle, thank you so much for those final words. We've hit the button of half an hour, I'm afraid. Thank you for joining us today. As always, great value. We can't wait until we can see you in London, and maybe you'll come along in person to one of our events and share more with us. Maybe the next book after this one, Michelle, although we should let this one get onto the shelves probably before we do that. But very best of luck. I hope everything goes well for you. And thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and I love your thoughtful questions and conversation. So good luck to you and to everyone.
Take care.
Take care. So,
having had a wonderful 4 hours of sessions today, it's my pleasure now to introduce Jo Coles from Willis Towers Watson. And Jo, you're going to close with some reflections and bring our forum to a close, summing up the focus again of future professional fitness and hitting the sweet spot, I guess it could be, between technical skills, soft skills and behaviours, and ultimately the value of resilience and personal resilience, self-awareness and the future thinking in whatever the world in future holds for us. I'm sort of tending to use no normal at the moment because we just really don't know what the future holds. And some of us find that exciting and some of us put not very in the front of exciting. So Jo, you've got over 30 years of business leadership experience, successfully driving people and change across multiple business units and locations. I'm told that you've been in sales, marketing, operations, process improvement, all sorts of different roles during that time, working either as an individual contributor or as part of a senior leadership team at a country, regional and global level. And I believe you joined Willis back in 2009 as a sales and marketing leader for international, and then moved into the international COO role in February 2013, and then more recently to the UK as CRB sales and marketing leader in May 2018. And prior to Willis Towers Watson, if you could possibly pack in anything prior to Willis Towers Watson, you spent over 20 years apparently in General Electric, living and working in 7 different businesses and countries around the world. Jo, we really appreciate you being here today. I want to reiterate again our thanks to Willis Towers Watson for being our partners in organising this event. But Jo, I'm going to hand over to you for your final words.
Thank you. And thank you very much for allowing us to help with this, but also asking me to sum up. So I have here an enviable task of trying to condense 3.5 hours of really interesting speak into about 10 minutes. So for any of the speakers still listening, apologies if I don't capture all your key points, but to Julia's point, we're just trying to sort of highlight for everyone on the call, what were we trying to get across today? And it started with Julia at the very start saying the world has changed and the world has changed. So what key skills do we have to have? What competencies do we need as risk managers to drive this forward? And so that's what I'm going to pick out, the bits that I think were the most relevant. But I think just to start with, my basic thread for this is going to come from we are the risk managers, and you've heard over and over again, we have to have a voice. We have to be able to share our voice and give our opinions. And actually that takes courage. And to have courage, you need a level of confidence. And to get that confidence, you need to have the competencies. So over and over again, you've heard great tips and ideas on how you can build those competencies to give you the confidence, to give you the courage that then drives that voice. And we started with Amanda. She talked about the EX, which was the employee experience, about how do the employers engage with the employees to make sure that they truly get it. What has changed? What can they build on? And how do they do that balance between the organisation and the individual? To that point, it was all about what can we learn from last year? How can we apply that to the future, both for the business, but also for ourselves? And then the next two sessions that we talked about were very much about us and what do we need. So we started off at the top with our mental health. So we heard the panel, they were talking about mental health, how it's absolutely key. And they talked about the balance between the resources and the challenges. Could I have the next slide, please? I'm sure somebody will change the slides as we go along. There we go. Thank you. So, and that was all about those resources. What resources do we have as individuals to help us face those challenges? And a lot of that, again, they use the word confidence, they use the word network. And I love the fact they talk about you have to have relationships, but it is the quality of those relationships, not the quantity. Have people you can rely on, have people you respect, who can give you feedback, who can give you input and can absolutely help you pull together what do you know about a topic, what do you not know about a topic, and how can you build that together? They were talking very much about how you build that network and how you build these ideas is be proactive. Start challenging yourself, start being curious. And we've heard these words, proactive and curious, over and over again this morning, as we talk about how do we think about the world where we are and where we want to be. And I love the fact they talked about, if you have a setback, if things don't go quite as you anticipate, what can you do about it? What is your new Everest? Okay, if you're not going to play for the All Blacks, hey, I'll go and play for Ireland and I'm going to get a load more caps and actually live my best life. And that was really good. Plus, there's a little plug in there for a free app that I particularly liked. So we talked about our mental health and how important that is for us as individuals to be able to face the world and change. And then we talked about actual physical brain health. So our next, Gary was talking to us about resilience. Resilience comes from within. What can we do to absolutely drive how we face change and how we face the future? And this is prepare for the future. Again, don't just do the same over and over again. Don't just stick to the same old habits, but actually think differently. And he gave us 6 key things that we could change. He talked about sleep being good for us, using nature, some of the real basics. But he also referenced, again, he went back to social content, social connections, and challenging ourselves. Keep it fresh. Be pragmatic, choose to go and learn new things, challenge your habits. It's really easy to stick in the same ruts, but actually, how can we take that forward? And how can you actually challenge our own expectations? We know what patterns we're comfortable with. And it was back to that lovely conversation we just had with Michelle. We know who we are. We know what our experiences have created for us. Okay, great. But then how do we see the world differently? How do we see the people through different eyes? Because that is absolutely key in us recognizing that the world is changing and we have to change with it. He talked about leaders helping us define reality, the Napoleon quote. But then that comes back to us. What do we know? What do we have surety on? What are we clear on? What do we not know? What can we control? And how can we take it forward? And some of these things about choice, both physically and mentally, it takes practice. It's easy to go with the status quo, but actually the world is changing so rapidly and the risks that we are facing are changing so rapidly. We have to do something about it. And that's how we then moved after the coffee break into our second session, our second sort of areas. And that was talking then about, we had the cyber risk and we had VUCA. Cyber, I think, in essence, it was saying the cyber challenges are becoming more and more sophisticated. What we thought we knew and what we thought protected us in the past is not necessarily what will protect us in the future. And what is the big difference? We can build the walls as high as we like. We can put in place all the technology to support us. But frankly, it's people. It is us, both as risk managers, but also our people that we work through. They are our best line of defense. And for that to work, we've got to really think about the risk and look for the unusual, because we might not have seen these things before. The world is changing so rapidly. And do we want, if we think about the people who do the cyber risk versus the victims, why are they doing it? How are they doing? So what? What does that mean for us? What's changing? And how do we go after that? So consider our own personal weaknesses, our own personal lack of knowledge, but also the industry and the business that we're working with, and say, okay, so what's changed? How can I adapt? And how can I take that forward? Because as I say, this is absolutely a people issue, and that's where cyber becomes a challenge. Because, as we heard from our next panel, we live in a VUCA world, which is such a great acronym, which I then had to go and look up. I know I should know these things, but it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Wow. I mean, if that's not a perfect growth area for risk, I don't know what is. So we talked a lot about risk is rife. Okay, so what does that mean for us? And I love the way that Charles was talking about purpose. Purpose is absolutely core because it affects us as risk professionals in what we do and how we do it. If you think about purpose, risk, and reputation, it's all joined up. I love that quote about, reputation is the shadow of the tree. It's not the tree. We can talk about having a great reputation, but if we don't create that, then frankly, again, nobody's going to believe us. And that's what it's about. It's about building that trust. So it's about moving from the why do we do something to the how we do it. Why is it so important? And again, as individuals, as risk managers, what are the decisions that we are making driving this as we go forward? So there is a lot of change there. We do need to get input from other people. We need to be very broad, and we need to think about it in the broadest sense. It's not just about the risk we're facing, but about the long-term risks, and sustainability came in at that point, which again is really key. Insurance is all about if something goes wrong, how do we put it right? How do we make it better? But it's about getting ahead of the message. It's not just about always running behind. And in this day and age with social media, speed of getting ahead of the message is absolutely key. And both Tom and Matthew talked about the tools that we can put in place to both discover the risk, mitigate, control, and frankly, repair. Because back where we started, the reputation is absolutely key. Which means that comes back to us as risk professionals. Wow, there's a lot going on in our world, and you're right, most of you are at the start of your career. So what do you do with all that? And again, you start hearing the same things coming back. Be curious, be reflective, be proactive. And we heard again and again, read the newspapers, look at reports, talk to lawyers and other people. Don't just talk to your own network, talk to other people, but keep up to date and start practicing in your own head that voice that you want to use, because you will be asked your opinion. Be ready to go for it and absolutely start pulling it together. And I love the fact that group started talking about risk and opportunity. That's again the big change that I've witnessed in the last 13 years I've been around. We've moved from not just worrying about the bad, but so what does that bring? What does that bring to us, and how do we apply it in our everyday? And how can we convert that into a language that other people will understand? And again, I think it was David, you said, but be pragmatic, not bureaucratic. Bring people with us. Don't just use risk jargon. Use language that everybody gets, because you have to bring the whole business. They look to you for advice. Use your voice, but take it forward. And then last but not least, we heard from Michelle, and wow, that's several books I'm going to have to buy now. Sorry, I haven't read them yet, but I will. I think that I love the story of Annie Edison. I mean, bless her. She did it, but then didn't get it all quite right. But then thinking about your own risk fingerprint, it's your world, it's your different ways of looking at the world. So what influenced you? What influences you? What's your experience and your knowledge? And how do you then take that, but remember to look through other people's eyes, because you might see things one way. I am not into detail. I would make a truly appalling risk manager, but I can take a great idea and I can sell it. And that's what I need you guys give me the confidence to do that. And that's what it's about. Challenge yourself, understand what you're good at, turn it round, and then understand, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for our business? And then that literally comes back to full circle. Okay, so what is my voice? What have I got to say? That's based on my competencies, my experience, which then gives me the confidence to then say, yes, I have something that I want to say, I want to share, and that gives me my voice that I bring back. So competence is key. Knowing thyself is key. Pulling it all together, using AirMic and all of the various tools that you have at your disposal in these sort of sessions is brilliant. Read, listen, talk, stay connected. The world is changing, but we are in such a great place to change with it. And on that note, Julia, back to you. Thank you so much for letting me listen to this fascinating morning.
Jo, that is absolutely fantastic, and just the sort of up that we wanted to finish today on. A brilliant summary, thank you. And I think I take away from this, the most important person in building your future is yourself. You've got to take change in your stride, take control, take care of yourself, because you can't achieve anything if you don't do that. Stay curious, which you mentioned, keep learning, keep ahead, and keep connected.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of C's going on in there, but I think there were some great messages that came out of today, and you've summed it up brilliantly. Thank you. And I just want to close today with, this is a bit like these the speech at the wedding, isn't it, where you thank everybody, but I'm going to do it anyway. I just want to thank Willis Towers Watson again, and for you, Joe, and your colleagues for your support in making today possible. I'd like to thank the delegates who signed up, because without them it would all be a bit pointless. So thank you for attending today, and I hope those that did got a lot out of it. I certainly have. I've really enjoyed the day. I'd like to thank Live Group, who are the company that help us put these great platforms together. I'd like to say that we did it all in-house, but of course we don't do it all in-house. We rely, like many things in life, on people who are professionals in what they do, and they are professionals in what they do. So thank you. And then very last, but definitely also not least, I'd like to thank the AIRMIC team, and particularly Adam and Susie, who put today's event together, and to other members of AIRMIC who were either moderators today or we know are in the background making this event happen. Last but not least, Joe, we'll see you in Brighton, 5th and 6th of October. Please do put those dates in your diary, because that's the AIRMIC annual conference. And we're going ahead with our plans, and we look forward to seeing you all there. So hope you enjoyed today. Stay well, stay safe, but always have fun. Thank you.
Thanks.